because you have nothing to back it up. You've exported everything that makes a country run. You've allowed that to happen for greed, for your Walmarts, for your Neiman Marcuses, for this idiocy of just buy, and debt. Because you've allowed your republic to be commandeered by two political parties whose only differences are their spending goals. Some would rather have them spend over here than over there. But they still want to spend. And it's a government. There hasn't literally been literally no difference in those two parties for quite some time, since I would say the Civil War. All one has to do is look at the results of history, and that's proof of the pudding. It's very blatant, and that's another reason I fault the American people for not being alert to their own freedoms and to value those freedoms. Instead, it's replaced by politics, which guides you into this economics, this insane economics of a single party with two names. There are many efforts at third parties in this country, but the two dominant, I've testified before state legislatures on behalf of third party politics. And the idiocy of Americans to tell me that if you vote for a third party, you're wasting your vote. What? Look at all the parliamentary governments in the world. They've pretty much kept industries and everything in their country rather than shipping it out. And they've kept, and the unions are alive and well there. It's a society that is not as materially minded as the Americans have. And I fault that with the reason we've become just so materially minded is because Americans don't have a culture. They left their cultures behind. And you see, culture is about values. Anyone says any different is a Democrat or a Republican. At any rate, culture, I find, is the necessary backbone for value. And if you have value, you have culture. I visited most of the countries in Europe, and they still had ironworks. They still had clothing industry, made their own shoes, etc., etc., and they still do. They also have such a culture as they know how to live in cities. In America, we don't know how to live in cities. Getting back to the local. If we had local industries, then families wouldn't be broken up. In the Americas, I think of only one city that comes close to Europe, and that would be Toronto. When I went to Europe for the first time, I was at the World Council of Churches, and it was a breath of fresh air. All these white Europeans were sitting around me, and just their conversations was refreshing. And I got a different look at what white people are all about. And it seemed to me immediately that these Europeans were a lot more responsible than Americans. It was immediate. Here's what it comes down to, mob rule. 50% plus one, and then the rest, the 49.9% left that disagree, have to follow the 50 plus 1%. It's idiotic. That is not freedom or an expression thereof. Look at the parliamentary, again I mentioned. The smallest party, if it organizes right, can be heard. And they go to the capitals of Europe. And your voice is heard, and they build coalitions with it, and all of that kind of stuff. But the point being is your voice is heard. And they're not letting the Federal Reserve print their money. So consequently, all the lies you hear from the corporate media in the United States, they give you Greece. And yet, England is far worse off than Greece. But they don't say anything. It's in America. I think in the think tank that I belong to, America is ranked the 3rd or 4th worst off country in the world, economically. Your leaders have forgotten all about you, so welcome to the reservation. Since patriarchy reared its ugly head a little over 6,000 years ago, everything that is structured in the patriarchal world is a pyramid. Everything. The religion, corporations, governments, everything's a pyramid structure. In order to get some sanity back into the world, you have to very simply go local. In the Republic of Lakotah, here's the way we're going. And I'm looking at my ancestors who are responsible in part for the Constitution of the United States of America. Why not go to the source? So I look at my people, and there's such a thing as a clan system within the nation. It's made on blood, related bloodlines. And then there's such thing as sister clans, or you might call in-laws. What those two groups prevent is incest at every level of life. Prevents it. It also ensures unanimity. A decision cannot be made unless it is unanimous. In the Republic of Lakotah, what we want to do in going local is to form neighborhoods. The neighborhoods can be 2 houses, 2 families. It can be 40 houses. It can be 400 houses. But if that community, when it makes a decision, it has to be unanimous. Remember, mob rule hasn't worked here in America. It's very evident. There are people in America today that go by that rule. The Quakers, they're alive and well and very prosperous. And the Six Nations people of the Iroquois Confederacy, they're still doing it that way. A good portion of them. There's others that have joined you Americans that refuse to accept that type of government. But if you take the time to be unanimous, to understand one another, so that you can forge a unanimous goal, it doesn't mean uniformity. It doesn't mean socialism. What it means is you agree to the end result, and you build the ladder needed for that end result. And you do it with patience. Patience is golden, people have said. And that's our simple way. So if you have a neighborhood that just 2 houses get along, that's fine. If you have a neighborhood with 20 houses that get along, that's fine. It doesn't matter the size. Size, bigger isn't better. As long as your neighborhood is unanimous. Now think about it. Just take a moment to really research that in your mind. What a concept, huh? To agree with everyone that is important to you, that are important to you. So, that's the goal of the Republic of Lakotah. Control. Patriarchal societies are after control. They want to control everything. Because you see, when you're at the top of a pyramid, whether you're a CEO, a president, or a king, or whatever, when you're on top of that pyramid, it's precarious up there because people are climbing up that pyramid. They want to take your place, and you know that. So the man at the top is fearful. That's why they have armies. That's why they have police. They're fearful. Decentralized America. Let's look at that. Centralized America is like a human body. You have veins going out all over to your extremities. And your extremities function very well. Then disease sets in. And all of a sudden, the blood is not being fed to all these extremities. And the right and the proper nourishment to keep your body free is co-opted because, number one, you don't eat right, you don't exercise right, and you don't have a feeling of well-being, because the psychological is very important. So your body begins to die prematurely. Well, that's the same thing with life. Life is organic. And in order for it to be organic, everything has to flow freely. If you over-centralize anything, look at a forest, for example. That is centralized. But what's the first thing you smell when you go into a forest? Decay. Because there's so many trees that are strong, and they're up there reaching for the energy of the sun. And then there's the other trees that came later, and they're weak, and they're searching for the sun, but they're crippled because they can't reach it because of the big trees. And so the forest begins to die. Or you look at everything and anything around you, and you'll see that anything that is centralized is wrong. What really blows my mind is you go to school and you learn history, but it means nothing to you because you don't do anything to change it. Another empire rears its ugly head and does the same thing that every other empire has done. They overreach, become greedy, and they become too large for themselves, and they can't maintain. Because what happens when you become an empire is you've got to maintain a military. That's the only industry left in America. That's proof positive. Look at the budget of the Defense Department. How do you allow that? We weren't like that when I was born. I was born in 1939. We weren't the world power. There was another empire called Britain. And allegedly, the rise of communism was another empire. Both of those empires are gone. Just like the Romans. Just like the Egyptians, the Ming Dynasty, Kublai Khan. On and on and on throughout history, the same mistakes over and over and over again. When I was growing up, it was a more libertarian society on its way to extinction, but still it was libertarian. Children were safe. We could go to the playground without adult supervision because we were safe as children. We didn't have to get permission from the school board